Hi, my name is Diane Schuster, and you're watching one of a series of videos that demonstrate the capabilities of COZYROC's SSIS Plus, which is a software suite of tasks and components for SQL Server integration services. These demonstrations were built using SQL Server Integration Services 2005. The COZYROC tasks and components are available for SQL Server Integration Services 2005, 2008, 2008 R2, 2012, and 2014 in both 32-bit and 64-bit editions. For more information, please visit www.cozyroc.com. In this video, we're going to talk about the query component, which you can use to retrieve data from a SQL database by using data flow input columns as query keys. This component comes in a package of tasks and components called SSIS Plus that complements the standard SSIS. Now in this demo, my goal is to create new invoices in QuickBooks from data that's stored elsewhere. And in this example, it's stored in two relational tables in a SQL database. One of the tables contains the invoice main object data, and the other table contains the invoice line items. And the data in the relational tables has a key that relates the records from the two tables. The challenge is that there could be any number of items associated with a single invoice. So we have the main invoice data, which consists of things like the customer and the order date. And then we have all the items that were purchased. We have no idea how many items will be associated with any given invoice. So how do we retrieve an unknown and variable number of items associated with each invoice? And how do you communicate downstream that you're done retrieving all the items for a particular invoice? And downstream, we're going to have the QuickBooks destination component from COZYROC. And the solution is to use the query transformation component. So what our query transformation component can do is it can perform a lookup in which one or more records are returned. And that's as compared to the lookup component that comes standard with SSIS, which can only look up one record per input record. And also, our query transformation can insert a sequence terminator after a set of records to mark the end of a sequence. So in this example, we can insert a sequence terminator after all of the items associated with a particular invoice are complete, so that the QuickBooks destination knows that it can now move on to process the next invoice. Here you can see our table named Invoices. It contains the main invoice objects. The last column is named Invoice Ref ID and is used as the key to look up the line items associated with each invoice. Here's the table that contains the invoice line items. It's named Invoice Items, and of course these records contain the Invoice Ref ID key column too. Now we need to install the query transformation in our toolbox. So we'll right mouse click in the toolbox, go to Choose Items, and go to SSIS Data Flow Items. And now we scroll down to where we find Query in the list here. And there you can see it is a COZYROC component. And we check in the checkbox there. And we're also using the QuickBooks destination, which you can see is already checked. Now we click OK. And you can see it's now in our toolbox. I've already configured all the connection managers. So the first thing we do now is drag the OLEDB source component onto our canvas. And we're going to use this component to read the invoice main objects from SQL. This is reading it from the first table. And now we go in to configure that. It's already chosen the correct connection manager. And so now we need to choose the correct table, which is for the invoice main objects, which is called Invoices. Take a quick look. There's the data I already showed you. And we'll go take a look at the columns, and we're done with that. And now we need to make two copies of the records as we read them from the Invoices table. So we're going to use multicast for that. And now for one of the copies of the record, we're going to feed that into the QuickBooks destination component from COZYROC. So we'll go in and choose the connection manager for QuickBooks. And of course we're creating an invoice, so the correct action is create, and the object will be invoice. And now we exit from here. And now we connect to one of the copies of the record to be fed into the QuickBooks destination. And as the input, we select invoice. Now we'll go in and finish configuring the QuickBooks destination for the invoice main object data. And as you can see, the columns have already been mapped. And now we'll go get the query component. And this is where another copy of the main invoice object record will be fed into. So again, we need to select a connection manager. I've already created the select statement that will do the lookup of all matching records that represent the invoice items to go with the invoice whose main object data we already read from the first relational table. And as you'll notice, it's a simple select statement that just reads the records from the invoice items table. The query component actually determines which records match. And we do a quick check on the syntax with the little green check mark there, and now we also leave the insert sequence terminator box checked. Some components won't need that, but the QuickBooks destination does require that. And I'll show you exactly what this does a little bit later in this demo. We'll take a look at the columns here. The only thing to map is the key column, because the columns on the left are the columns from the invoice main object, and the columns on the right are from the items records. And then we'll just check the check boxes next to the columns that we want to pass downstream. And we click OK. And now we connect that output to the QuickBooks destination, and that is associated with what QuickBooks calls the invoice items invoice line. Now we need to go complete the configuration in the QuickBooks destination. So we already looked at this, the invoice main object, so now we're looking at the invoice items invoice line columns, and we need to manually map those. The only one that was automatically mapped based on name was quantity. So we map full name to item ref full name, and we map list ID to item ref list ID. We go to the error output. This is used to tell us about errors. We tell it to redirect instead of fail. And this is also how we learn the new list ID that was assigned by QuickBooks for the new invoices we created. So we're using an Excel Destination Plus component from COZYROC for that. And we select the right connection manager and also select the correct worksheet. And we'll take a quick look at the columns. And now we're done configuring that. So we're ready to execute. And we have success. So we'll stop debugging. Now we'll take a look at the invoices that we created in QuickBooks itself, and here we see David Duke, and there's his invoice, and you can see the line items there. And then we have Eva, and there's her invoice, and Franklin, and Gloria. Here we're looking at the Excel file where we had our QuickBooks destination component write the results of the operation to create the invoices. And this is where it provides the ID and the edit sequence for those newly created invoices. And if we had had an error, this is where it would provide information about the error. The error codes of -1 in that column indicate that there were no errors. If you had a code there other than -1, it would indicate that there was an error, and it would give you a description of that error. Now I want to show you the difference in what the query generates depending on whether you have the insert sequence terminator checked or not. So the first one we're going to leave it checked, and we have a data viewer set up so that we can see the results easily. So we'll execute this. There you can see the invoice item records are grouped by the invoice that they're associated with. So there's the first 2 for David Duke, and then a null line, and then 3 for Eva Ernest, and so on. So the query component has inserted a null line in between every sequence. Now we're going to go in and change the query component to not use the insert sequence terminator. So we turn off that checkbox, and we'll execute this again. And there you can see there's no null line between any of the items. They're all just grouped together. In this demonstration, I showed you how easy it is to use the query component to retrieve data from a SQL database by using data flow input columns as query keys. This component comes in a package of tasks and components called SSIS Plus that complements the standard SSIS. And that concludes this demo.